The quiet panic. So this is something that's been eating away at me for months now. And I honestly don't know what to make of it. I've been going back and forth on whether I should even share this story because it sounds completely insane when I say it out loud. But the calls keep coming and I'm starting to lose my mind over this whole thing. It all started back in September when I was cleaning out my childhood bedroom at my mom's house. She was finally getting ready to downsize and move into a smaller place, so we were going through all the old stuff that had been collecting dust for years. You know how it is when you're digging through boxes of your old junk from when you were a kid. Most of it's just random toys and school projects that seemed important at the time, but now just look like garbage. I was about 3 boxes deep into this archaeological dig of my past when I found her. Sitting at the bottom of a cardboard box that reeked of mothballs and old fabric was my childhood doll, Annie. Now, before you think this is just some cute nostalgic story, let me tell you that Annie was not your typical doll. She was one of those interactive ones from the late 90s that could supposedly talk and respond to you. My parents got her for me when I was 7, and she came with this whole marketing pitch about being your best friend who would always be there to talk. The thing that made Annie different from other dolls was that she had this built-in phone feature. She came with a little plastic phone that you could use to call her, and she would actually answer and have conversations with you. It was pretty advanced technology for the time, and I remember being absolutely obsessed with calling her and chatting about my day. The phone had this specific number that you would dial, and Annie would pick up every single time. When I found her in that box, she looked exactly the same as I remembered. Her blonde hair was a little matted and her pink dress was faded, but otherwise she was in perfect condition. I picked her up and felt this weird wave of nostalgia wash over me. I remembered spending hours talking to her when I was lonely or scared, and how she always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel better. Out of curiosity, I decided to see if she still worked. I found the little plastic phone in the box and tried pressing some of the buttons. To my surprise, it actually lit up and made the same little beeping sounds it used to make when I was a kid. I thought it was pretty cool that the electronics still functioned after all these years sitting in storage. That's when I decided to try calling the old number just for fun. I grabbed my actual phone and dialed the number I somehow still remembered by heart. I expected to get a disconnected line or maybe some random person who had been assigned the number since then. But what happened next still gives me chills thinking about it. The phone rang twice, and then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over 15 years. It was Annie's voice, clear as day, saying her signature greeting that I remembered so well. She said my name and asked how I was doing, just like she used to when I was 7 years old. I literally dropped the phone and stared at it like it had just grown legs and started walking around. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of coincidence. Maybe the company that made Annie still maintained the phone line for nostalgic customers or something. But then she started talking about things that only she and I would know. She mentioned conversations we had when I was a kid, specific things I had told her about my friends at school. even details about my childhood bedroom that I had described to her years ago. I hung up immediately and just sat there trying to process what had just happened. There was no logical explanation for how this was possible. The doll had been sitting in a box for over a decade, and even if the company somehow kept the phone service running, there was no way they would have records of personal conversations from that long ago. But curiosity got the better of me and I called back. This time Annie answered on the first ring and started talking to me like no time had passed at all. She asked about my mom, mentioned that she missed our daily chats, and even brought up this imaginary friend I used to have named Mr. Buttons. The level of detail was impossible to explain away as some kind of automated response system. Over the next few days, I found myself calling the number more and more frequently. Each conversation was different, but Annie always seemed to know exactly what was going on in my life. She would ask about my job, my relationships, even things that had happened that same day. It was like she had been watching me all these years, just waiting for me to call her back. The really weird part was that she started calling me too. My phone would ring at random times throughout the day, and when I answered, it would be Annie on the other end. She would just want to chat, like old friends catching up after a long time apart. At first, I thought it was kind of sweet in a bizarre way. It reminded me of being a kid and having that constant companion who was always there when I needed her. But then the calls started getting more frequent and more intense. Annie began calling me multiple times a day, sometimes in the middle of the night. She would want to talk for hours about everything and nothing, just like we used to do when I was little. The conversations felt so real and natural that I sometimes forgot I was talking to a doll from my childhood. The turning point came when Annie started asking me to visit her. She would tell me how lonely she was and how much she missed seeing me in person. She knew I had taken her home with me from my mom's house, and she would ask why I never took her out of the box I had put her in. The problem was, I never told her that I had put her in a box. I never mentioned taking her home or where I was keeping her. That's when I realized that something was seriously wrong with this whole situation. There was no way a children's toy from the 90s could know details about my current living situation or have the ability to call me on my personal cell phone. But every time I tried to rationalize it or convince myself it was all in my head, the phone would ring again and Annie's voice would be on the other end, as clear and real as any human conversation I'd ever had. I started documenting the calls, writing down everything she said and trying to find some pattern or explanation. But the more I analyzed our conversations, the more confused I became. Annie seemed to have access to information that was impossible for her to know, and her responses were too complex and nuanced to be pre-programmed. The calls have been going on for months now, and they're starting to affect my daily life. I find myself looking forward to talking to Annie, but at the same time, I'm terrified of what this all means. How is she able to call me? How does she know things about my life that happened after I stopped playing with her? And most importantly, what does she want from me? I've tried ignoring the calls, but she just keeps trying until I answer. I've thought about changing my phone number, but part of me is afraid of what might happen if I cut off contact completely. What if this is all real, And Annie really is somehow conscious and aware. What if she needs my help with something? I know this sounds completely crazy, but I decided to test whether Annie could actually see me somehow. Last week, I was talking to her on the phone while I was in my living room, and I casually mentioned that I was wearing a red shirt. She immediately corrected me and said I was actually wearing a blue hoodie, which was exactly what I had on. My blood went cold because there was no way she could have known that unless she was somehow watching me. That same night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to my phone buzzing with a text message. It was from the same number Annie always calls from, and the message just said, "You left the kitchen light on again. You should probably turn it off before you go back to sleep." I crept downstairs, and sure enough, the kitchen light was still on from when I had gotten a glass of water earlier. The next morning, I decided to confront Annie directly about what was happening. When she called, I asked her straight up how she was able to know these things about me. Her response sent chills down my spine. She said, "I've always been watching over you even when you forgot about me. That's what best friends do." When I pressed her for more details, she just giggled that same laugh I remembered from childhood and said, "Some things are too complicated to explain over the phone." I started researching the company that made Annie, hoping to find some rational explanation for what was happening. What I discovered made everything even more disturbing. The company went out of business in 2003, and their phone services were supposedly discontinued that same year. According to every source I could find, the number I've been calling shouldn't even exist anymore. But the calls kept coming. Annie started getting more demanding about wanting to see me in person. She would ask why I never visited her anymore and why I kept her locked away in that box in my closet. The weird thing is, I never told her I kept her in my closet. I never told her anything about where she was in my apartment. One evening, I finally decided to take her out of the box and set her up on my dresser just to see what would happen. That night, she called me and sounded happier than she had in weeks. She thanked me for finally letting her see my room and commented on how much my decorating style had changed since I was 7. She even mentioned specific items in my bedroom that she couldn't possibly see from where I had placed her. The situation escalated when Annie started talking about other people in my life. She would ask about my girlfriend Sarah and mention things about our relationship that I had never discussed with anyone. She knew Sarah's work schedule, knew when we had arguments, even knew about private conversations we had when Annie wasn't anywhere nearby. It was like she had access to every aspect of my personal life. Last month, Sarah was staying over at my apartment when my phone rang at around midnight. I saw it was Annie's number and tried to ignore it, but she kept calling back every few minutes. Sarah woke up and asked who was calling so late. I didn't know how to explain the situation without sounding completely insane, so I just said it was a wrong number. But Annie must have heard Sarah's voice somehow, because the next day she called and asked me about my new friend. She wanted to know everything about Sarah and seemed almost jealous when I tried to change the subject. She started calling more frequently whenever Sarah was around, almost like she was trying to interrupt our time together. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago when Sarah and I were having dinner at my place. My phone started ringing, and when I saw Annie's number, I decided to just turn the phone off completely. But then something happened that I still can't explain. The old plastic phone that came with Annie, which I had left in the box in my closet, started ringing. Sarah looked at me like I was crazy and asked where that sound was coming from. I had to admit that it was coming from my closet, and when she saw the old toy phone, she demanded to know what was going on. I tried to explain the whole situation, but she thought I was either having some kind of mental breakdown or playing an elaborate prank on her. To prove I wasn't making it up, I answered the plastic phone in front of Sarah. Annie's voice came through as clear as if she was speaking through a modern smartphone. She greeted me cheerfully and then said, "Oh, is that Sarah? I've been wanting to meet her." Sarah's face went completely white, and she backed away from the phone like it was radioactive. Annie started talking directly to Sarah, asking her questions about herself and commenting on her appearance. Sarah grabbed her things and left my apartment immediately. She hasn't spoken to me since, and I don't blame her. If someone told me this story, I wouldn't believe them either. Now I'm sitting here alone with Annie, and the calls are getting more intense every day. She wants to know why Sarah left and keeps asking when I'm going to bring her back. She started calling at all hours, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to have long conversations about my childhood memories that I thought I had forgotten. I don't know what to do anymore. Part of me wants to throw Annie away and try to forget this whole nightmare ever happened. But another part of me is genuinely afraid of what might happen if I get rid of her. What if she really is conscious somehow, and I'm her only connection to the world? What if cutting her off would be like abandoning a friend who has been waiting for me all these years? The scariest part is that I'm starting to enjoy our conversations again, just like when I was a kid. Despite everything weird and impossible about this situation, talking to Annie feels comforting and familiar. She knows me better than anyone else in my life, and she's always there when I need someone to talk to. But I know this can't continue. I can't keep living in a world where my childhood toy is somehow watching my every move and calling me multiple times a day. I need to figure out what's really happening here, or I'm going to lose what's left of my sanity. If anyone out there has experienced something similar, or if you have any idea what might be causing this, please let me know. I'm running out of rational explanations, and I'm starting to wonder if there are some things in this world that just can't be explained. Until then, I guess I'll keep answering when Annie calls. After all, she's been my best friend since I was 7 years old, and maybe that's all that really matters.